Hi, and welcome back to another video where I explain some of the sources behind the poems that I wrote in my collection between hindsight and foresight. I put up a poll on Monday to ask people which from a selection of titles was the poem they wanted to hear the backstory from. And I got some responses about the poem I'm going to talk to you about today called The Dark Place. I was a little hesitant about talking about it, a bit hesitant about doing the behind the story poem of this particular poem because it's one of the hardest poems to talk about in the collection. It's one of the hardest poems to have written within the collection because of the source of it. But I think that difficulty of talking about it is probably part of the main reason why it's so important that I do choose to talk about it. The Dark Place is my poem that I wrote. It's one of the oldest in the collection. I wrote as a teenager, or at least the very first verse I wrote as a teenager, but it didn't feel finished in the whole stumbling teenage way of trying to express, a overwhelming feeling. I didn't quite get it, didn't quite finish it. So it's not something that I felt was finished until I had written the second and third verse. So I need you to understand that The Dark Place was a poem that was written over time when I was able to get a handle on what I was trying to express and how I was trying to verbalize a particularly strong emotion. Now, it's important that you understand most of my poetry is used to kind of pin down an emotion, an experience, or an event, a memory, both good and bad or in between, those things to the page so that I can either look back on them and remind myself of the good experience, or to kind of expel something that is holding me back. And it's a poetic term called catharsis. And catharsis is from the Greek. It's from Aristotle's On Poetics. It was some of his literary theory behind why we do drama, why we write poetry, why we express ourselves in verse, is that we need a catharsis, which is a process of releasing and thereby providing relief from a strong or repressed emotion. So catharsis is what a lot of poetry is about, a lot of song lyrics are about, a lot of art is about putting down onto the canvas or the page what we need to put out there for others to see. And sometimes we can't do it in person, sometimes we can't do it out loud. What I also need you to understand is that this poem is about a mental health issue, about the experience of episodic depression and it was written, at least the beginning of it was written when I was experiencing my very first episode of clinical depression. Now, I need you to understand that anyone who has a mental health issue, anyone who experiences depression in any form, whether it's manic depression or episodic depression or postnatal depression, any form of mental health issue, everyone's experience is individual. Everyone experiences a similar clinical mental health issue differently. It's not the same for everybody. There are similarities and there are things that we share, but it's not something that is going to be the same for everyone. But The Dark Place is a poem that I wrote to help me shape and voice what I was feeling, to help me put on the paper so I could cathartically expel this overwhelming, overpowering thing that had a hold of my emotions when I was a teenager. So at that time, I knew that there was like a stigma and a fear about talking about mental health, but poetry was fine. Teenage emotional angst in poetry is completely expected. It's so much of a cliche that people still talk about teenage emo poetry. It's about the whole dramatic, over dramatic need to like, call out in poetry. I think that we need to take the cliche part of it away. I think that we need to accept and welcome that kind of cathartic expression. I think it's extremely healthy to put your words into poetry and onto the page, because I did it with a lot of my poetry, as may be evident if you read through the collection. Dark place was the metaphor I referred to when I was a teenager, because that's what it felt like. It felt like being in the dark. It felt like the refrain that says, you're sinking into a dark place with no way out. And the metaphor gave shape, gave voice to that feeling, and allowed me to get past it, to survive the first episode of depression that I ever experienced, with the help of my unbelievably fantastic family, with the help of my friends, with the help of my youth group at my church. You name the toolbox, I looked for someone to help me, and that was what got me through it. So those people that care about me are what helped me survive that first episode. But penning it to the paper so that I could form some kind of understanding of it was equally important. I had to give it voice. I had to give it shape so that I could see it and I could look at it and I could get past it, get through it. But I'll tell you another secret of mental health issues. A lot of them are never go away. They're never gone. They're just something that you live with and you develop methods to live with. Now, I read the poem every now and again to remind me of what I survived. I read the poem every now and again to consider the metaphor, to think about it, to think about if that's still true as to the experience of my depressive episodes when I have them, which is very rare. And I also have altered the metaphor to nowadays. It's not a dark place. It's not a physical place that I feel locked up in or sunk in. Now it's more like a black dog that sits in the corner that I roll up my newspaper every now and again and whack him on the nose to keep him away. Now that metaphor has evolved and changed for me to be a black dog that, I live with, sits in the corner. Every now and again, I whack it over the head to keep it away. I use the tools that doctors have given me. I use the tools that my friends and my family have given me in order to keep that part of myself under control, but accepted. And I think that, when we think about people who experience depression, we have this image of them as hurting and tortured souls, which is true, but it's not always accurate. So a couple of things that I want you to understand. That poem is my experience of an episode. That poem was written so that I could understand the experience I was going through. I could feel and understand the emotion that I was living with. And I wrote it down and I put it in the book, despite it being difficult to put out there, despite it being difficult to expose that part of my emotions, so that people who know others experiencing it could understand a little what it sometimes feels like. Not everybody going through depression is going to feel the same way I did, but if you've never experienced it, you have no idea what it's like. And so another point I really want you to understand is that people who experience episodic depression don't always share it because they don't want to be a burden to the people that they care about and that care about them. We know you care. We know you want to help. It's not that we don't want to let you help. It's that we don't want to be a burden, because that makes it feel worse. Another thing that you need to understand if you know someone experiencing depression or dealing with depression is that it's not your fault that they're depressed. It's not your fault that they have a mental health condition that they've lived with for a long time. It's not something that you did or that you didn't do that caused the depression or that, made it happen. Like, most of the times, those of us experiencing the episodic depression don't even know where it came from or what will set it off. It's not that we don't want to tell you why we feel that way. We don't understand. We don't always know. We don't always know what set it off. We don't always know why we're feeling that way. We just know we do. We just know that we feel that way and that we have to work through it. So when you read The Dark Place and you read that experience, I want you to imagine having to fight that experience. Not often or necessarily frequently, but think about putting yourself in that place and how you would deal with that. And one of the best things about the poem is how it ends, waiting for an end not in sight. It's not something that goes away. But the thing is, it does end. The episode ends, you get through some form of the experience, and one of the most important things to getting through that experience is people that you care about not giving up on being there, not actively doing anything, not fighting anything, not taking a sword to the monsters in the dark, not putting a cage around the black dog, just handing you the newspaper to whack the black dog over the nose yourself, handing you the tissue and just sitting there while you cry and being okay with it and not feeling guilty like there's something else you're supposed to be doing. If you know someone who experiences that, it's important that you just be there. Just don't forget to check on them. Don't stop talking to them about normal things, not getting them to just constantly, what's wrong? Talk to me. No, just normal stuff, just everyday stuff. Distraction and care over a long term will really lift up that light to get through the dark place. So this has been an extremely long video because this is an extremely important poem to me, and I wanted to fully and totally explain the place that the dark place comes from is a place that a lot of people are struggling with right now. A lot of people who have this mental health issue are fighting it tooth and nail now that we're all isolated from not our own devices. So when we are all sitting in the dark, it's important to reach out. And we may not be able to see the hands of the people walking beside us, but we know they're there. So if you know anyone who would feel better or have that cathartic release in understanding the experience better, please feel free to read The Dark Place together. Please feel free to contact me because I am always happy to talk about my experiences with someone who needs someone to talk to. But most importantly, look after yourself, be okay with not being okay, and be okay with sharing that with someone else. You're not a burden. No one is a burden. So that is the story and the inspiration and the source behind my poem, The Dark Place. And as always, I thank you for supporting my poetry and supporting my page. If you liked the poems that were released last week, please feel free to share anything from the page with people. If you think that you know someone who loves poetry or would enjoy it, please share the page, please share the videos, and you can now purchase the poems on Amazon. They are released, they will arrive. The paperback's a little delayed, but hopefully these poems, my experiences, will be out there in the world and will do some good. Thank you again.